the first to know in Nsem-Pii TV.
In fact, aban akọ aban aba, aban akọ aban aba. Na His Excellency John Dramani Mahama ne second coming way. The ministers are wabo mudi nyina upe minister ba kwa ono onfa politics enye na eyi ana eye ya minister yi obeki kan se eye bia obeka se eye bi a onfa ehun ene NDC NPP Honorable Nsem-Pii the member of parliament for Aswanse constituency. Na Honorable Nsem-Pii as Minister for the Interior, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama the Jumade Kesebi Eshanensa Nina for election violence ana koso Ghana member titu edu general elections and by election eba aya violence koso just recently the koso Ablekuma North. Na enona His Excellency John Dramani Mahama de Jumade bi share Honorable Nsem-Pii answer the Minister for the Interior. Say on shame at trusema course omo a omo shase omo a omo tachiri ene de keka on ema election violence nyina eba. Na ade ba ko na Ghana concern so pa the member of parliament for Awutu Senya East Phyllis na Koryor Nsema Odibetu dwa egu former Minister of State, former member of parliament for Awutu Senya East Yemame Mavis Hawa Koomson say election 2024 no Honorable Mavis Hawa Koomson enkofo eku ono Phyllis na Koryor NDC MP ni agent enum ama ebi prepra ende keka ho na Honorable Nsem-Pii ene odi Nsem-Pii na tudwa set down the record straight egu NDC MP Phyllis na Koryor na nima ase basa Nsem-Pii ebusia meka ni nyina odi yenjibre yenti Honorable Nsem-Pii the Minister for the Interior ensema ene odi tudwa and ensema odi tudwa efa dwumade kese a His Excellency John Dramani Mahama the shine so on shame efa election violence so yenjibre yenti ensema minister.
How the minister, the Deputy Minister for Interior, the Acting Chief Director, Minister of Interior, the Inspector General of Police, representatives, members of POMAG, directors from the Interior Ministry and the Information Service Department, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of us once again. It gives me a great sense of duty to present to you all the outcomes of the report on the 2020 and 2024 election violence which occurred across various centers in the country. Ladies and gentlemen, elections in Ghana in recent times have been characterized by violence in various forms. In 2020 and 2024 general elections, we recorded some isolated incidents such as violence resulting in loss of lives. To address this recurrent and bring justice to the victims, the President, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, directed the formation of a special investigative task force to re-examine cases of electoral violence fatalities, identify the causes, hold perpetrators accountable, and propose measures to prevent further occurrence. On January 16, 2025, the Inspector General of Police inaugurated a special task force within the Criminal Investigation Department, CID, of the Ghana Police Service. The mandate of the task force was to collaborate with the stakeholders to identify, review, and investigate all electoral violent cases that resulted in fatalities during the 2020 and 2024 general election. The Special Investigation Task Force identified 12 cases that took place during the 2020 and 2024 general election. These cases had resulted in 15 deaths across the country and well over 40 individuals got injured. The report outlined detailed account of all the 12 cases recorded during the period. The detailed report, which has been submitted to His Excellency the President, also contains the various incidents, how they were brought or got to the notice of the police, and actions taken by investigators in line with the laid down investigation protocol and procedure. The report further detailed action taken when the Special Investigative Task Force took over the cases at level initially investigators had reached, and detailed findings derived from further interviews, interrogations, field visit, reconstruction of crime and crime scene, and forensic analysis of various materials of evidence retrieved during the investigation. During the general election, presents various criminal offenses which will have been committed by different persons involved. The report took into account a number of incidents where some procedural actions were overlooked. There were instances of clear breaches of discipline, violation of legal requirement, and total neglect by officers who were either present or responsible for situations that required prompt, responsive actions. The focus is to avoid veering into areas that might confuse procedural breaches with the main mandate, which is to investigate, identify, and prosecute persons responsible for death during the two general elections in the years of the 2020 and 2024. There were also instances of persons being rushed to the court on frivolous and vexatious charges when the same incident had resulted in the death of person or two. Great effort was expended to distill these charges and identify persons against whom evidence could be produced for the deaths recorded during these elections, with evidence to sustain criminal charges being preferred against them. Through careful review of police dockets, on-site inspections, and stakeholders interview, the Special Investigative Task Force identified 12 specific cases. I must be quick to add that I have since directed that the report of the Commission on the Election Violence at Ayawaso West Wagon be implemented fully for justice to prevail. 6 each from the 2020 and the 2024 general election, which collectively led to 15 deaths as mentioned earlier and injured 40 others. These incidents span multiple regions, including Bono East, Greater Accra region, Bono region, Northern region, Central region, Savannah, and Asante region. The circumstances of each case vary, but nearly all involve the use of firearms during confrontation between supporters of the two major political parties, and instances where security personnel resorted to the use of live ammunition, warning shots as means of crowd control. Investigation into one of the cases during the 2020 general election at Odododo was completed. The Attorney General is currently prosecuting 3 persons who are standing trials at the High Court Criminal Division, Accra. The investigation established that 3 of the cases resulting in 4 deaths are traceable to the use of firearms by armed police patrol teams. Military personnel were also found to be responsible for 3 of the cases resulting in the death of 3 persons when they intervened to restore calm to chaotic crowds. Investigation further established that 4 of the cases, which resulted in 5 deaths, were recorded when party enthusiastic supporters resorted to the use of firearms against their opponent. The 2 other cases involve persons who were lynched during confrontation between supporters of the 2 major parties. It is worth noting that 21 suspects have been identified through witness interview, scene visit, reconstruction of crime and crime scene, and forensic and ballistic examination of material of evidence relevant to the cases. 11 new dockets have been built on the cases. 4 of the identified suspects have been arrested and admitted to police inquiry bills to facilitate further investigation and to trace their accomplices. 5 other identified suspects have been remanded in prison custody. Warrants of arrest have been procured to facilitate the arrest of some of the identified suspects who are on the run. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, the 2020 investigation reports are as follows. Tachima South, that's Tachima South constituency in Tachima. The observation of the task force are as follows: that the injury could have been avoided had the security personnel not resorted to the use of live ammunition for crowd control. The use of firearms by security personnel was not done under the command of a senior officer who could have ensured that appropriate rules of engagement were observed. Security personnel, especially the police patrol teams at the collation center, fired indiscriminately, and in some cases they directed fire at the escaping crowd. Spent shells could not be retrieved from the scene, as in the case of the Tachima. Immediately the day after the election, it rained heavily, and so they couldn't pick much from the scene, and no bullets or projectiles were retrieved from the bodies of the deceased to assist ballistic examination to identify which weapon caused the injuries or death. It made it difficult to bring finality as to who actually caused the injury and death for now. However, investigation will continue until justice is done. The recommendation from the task force was that the crowd control response of security personnel by resorting to firing of live arms and also directing fire at the escaping crowd is not acceptable. The victims of the gunshots have suffered injuries that cause them pain, loss of resources for treatment, as well as income. Families have also lost breadwinners. The state should take steps to the state should take up the responsibility to compensate the families who lost their breadwinners, as well as those who suffered injuries. Police should receive orientation and desist from using lethal force in crowd control situation. Appropriate crowd control gear should be provided to security services. Party executives, officials, and persons involved in election management should be well educated on the provision of the Anti-Vigilante Act 2019, Act 999. Action taken so far on the Tachima. The report has been forwarded to the Attorney General for the compensation to be given to the families of the deceased and the injured. Docket of the case is also referred to the cold case unit of the CID police, meaning that the investigation will continue further until we are able to find the actual perpetrators. Odio constituency in the Greater Accra region. The observation of the special task force, is that investigations into the incident failed to identify the person who shot and killed the deceased, Rito and Emmanuel Dompre. However, 3 identified persons by police as those who fired shots into the crowd and injuring them were charged with the offenses of conspiracy to commit murder, contrary to the Section 23(1) and 47 of the Criminal Offences Act 1960, Act 29, and attempted murder, contrary to Section 48 of the same Act. They have been committed and are standing trial at the High Court, Criminal Court 1, Accra. The recommendation of the task force is that the task force recommends monetary compensation to the families of the deceased. The injured must abide by the judgment of the court in the trial, after which compensation, if any, may be determined. So the actions that we've taken so far on this is that same report has been forwarded to the Attorney General for the workout of compensation to the deceased family. The docket is also at the cold case units, since we've not been able to actually get those who fired the shot that killed the 2 citizens. Ablekuma Central, that's Odoko Police Church. The observation of the task force is that investigation revealed that the soldiers were interviewed and showed video of a man dressed in military uniform and reported to be the person who fired, resulting in the death of Abbas Ibrahim, but they maintained that the said soldier was not known to them. The case involved accused Collins Kweku, alias Kola, who was charged with causing harm and use of offensive weapon, is still pending before the Circuit Court 4, Accra. The use of armed military personnel for crowd control duties accounted for the incident that led to the death of 1 person and injured 4 others. Police personnel were present at the center and should have controlled the crowd. Lack of coordination between the police and the military men who were on duty accounted for the situation in which the military resorted to the use of live ammunition to attempt to control the crowd. The incident was avoidable because the agitation and shouting by the party supporters were outside the collation center. The action of Collins Kweku was a criminal offense. The recommendation of the task force is that election security management should be coordinated properly to determine when force is required for crowd control. The use of military in crowd control activity should cease if death resulting from high-handedness of state security are to be avoided. Police and sister security agencies should design ahead of election a well-coordinated plan on election security management. There should be controlled use of military. There should be controlled use of live ammunition from lethal weapons as a means of scaring or driving crowd from particular location. Capacity building is recommended for police and all arm-bearing security agencies whenever required for election security or crowd control duties. Compensation should be paid to the injured and to the family of the late Ibrahim Abbas. The action that we have taken since the report came is to forward that to the Attorney General for compensation of both the deceased family and those who got injured. The docket is also forwarded to the cold case unit of the CID, since that soldier or the one in the uniform has still not been identified. The Banda Ahikro, that's in the Bono region. Taking into consideration the advice from the Attorney General's office, the task force recommend the following. The investigation continues even though the township are not willing to give information out because of the rivalry between the two towns of Banda Ahikro and Banda Bonkazi, but the docket should be forwarded to the cold case unit. The monetary compensation should be paid to the family of the late Silas Wolonkame. Report forwarded to the AG for compensation to the deceased family. Doma West constituency, that's in Krankonta. This was also violence resulting from the 2020 voter registration mop-up exercise. The task force recommends that the supporters of both NDC and NPP who converged at the voter registration center near the DC Assembly premises on August 8, 2020 were engaged in riot. They were, however, not attacking the police or security personnel at the center. The use of live ammunition to disperse the riotous crowd by the police was inappropriate and does not conform to any laid-down crowd control method. No police officer or security detail at the registration center was under attack for his or her life to be in immediate danger. The task force therefore recommend that the family of the deceased, Kofi Robert alias Kofi Labet, be compensated. Victims, Ilyasu Gabriel and Kwame Gatan, should also be compensated based on the extent of injury suffered as a result of their medical.
Last time they're gonna see a